Hello, dear listeners, and welcome back to another enlightening episode of the MindfulNews Podcast. I'm your host, Guy, and as we navigate the landscapes of today's transformative discussions, we're joined by the remarkable Chris Altizer and Gloria Johnson-Cusak. They're co-authors of the Growing the Elephant, Increasing Advantage for All. The world's seen an increased focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion, so what's the story behind this, especially in the business sector? And how did it find its voice in our everyday conversations?
So essentially, the elephant in the room is the fact that there are unearned advantages, that some people have advantages based on who they are and where they are from. Mm-hmm. That is the reality that we are helping, encouraging people to embrace and to work with, to deal with that. And then hopefully, because then it's what do I do now?
Because that's how I was raised. The golden rule. You treat people that you'd like to be treated. And through those years into schooling and after that, realizing that what they dubbed the platinum rule, which is to treat others as they would prefer to be treated, it was a mind shift. Because why would everybody not want to be treated the way I am? And then recognizing that to satisfy the platinum rule of treating others as they would like to be treated, one has to understand how they would like to be treated. And to understand that, one has to understand how they have been treated.
What we believe very strongly is that this work and hopefully the tools that are provided in Growing the Elephant will allow people to reflect to the point that they're able to see how their individual mindsets and actions.
So the idea of Growing the Elephant is, one, to meet people where they are.
We also deep dive into earned advantage. Now, before this podcast, I hadn't even heard of this term, and I was really blown away by its nuances of diversity's evolution and its resonance within the legal spectrum. We talk about Chris and Gloria's journey to mindfulness and how it plays a huge role in their work. And we touch upon the complexities that the term privilege brings and how to navigate our diverse differences. Don't forget to like and share this podcast if it resonates with you, and subscribe to our YouTube channel to make sure you don't miss out on upcoming episodes. All this and more at mindfulnews.uk. So first of all, thank you, Chris and Gloria, so much for joining me today on the podcast. Chris, following a podcast that I did with the wonderful Rhonda McGee, the tenured law professor, the author of The Inner Work of Racial Justice, an amazing spokesperson for healing ourselves and transforming our communities through mindfulness. So a quick shout out to Rhonda. I know, Chris, you're a big fan of Rhonda's work and you refer to her as your North Star.
Yes.
You love that podcast, and you reached out. You explained about Growing the Elephant, a book that you co-wrote with Gloria, and just had to have you on the podcast. So welcome. Thank you so much for joining, and really excited to have this conversation.
We're very grateful for the opportunity.
One way that I love to begin the podcast, and it helps the listeners to get a feel of who are these people that we're about to engage with on this journey. Perhaps, Gloria, if we could begin with you. What is it about your youth that provides some context in the person that you are today?
Yeah. Wow, that question goes straight to the heart of every single thing, all of the intention that comes behind the work of this book and the work of my professional life. I am African American and Halawa Supani, which is a particular tribe based in North Carolina, the southern part of the United States. Did not realize that was a major part of my heritage until recently. So there's a backstory, which I will be happy to share with you. But in my youth, my experience was one of sort of coming up in a family of what we call now sort of sociologically working poor family in Washington, D.C., at the time, very much segregated and with some challenging family circumstances, really straight through my childhood and youth. I went to a public school that was famous for tearing down the school buses that took the students. They all came from public housing, most of them from public housing projects, and it was a tough environment. And yet there was lots of beauty, and I thrived academically in that junior high school, which was quite pivotal to my development. And then I ended up getting a full scholarship at a fancy college prep school, Sidwell Friends School, which was where the Obama kids went and lots of presidents' kids went, on a part of town that I literally did not know existed. Like, I got on the bus at 5:30 in the morning, and 2 hours later, I was in a part of town where everybody was white or something else. And I remember being on the bus the first time coming to that part of town, saying, where did all these white people come from? And it was segregated by both race and class, something that you know very well based on your background. I spent a lot of time in London and know that to be true. So I went there, and from then on, got a full scholarship to Columbia University, was told that I should not bother applying to any Ivy League institutions. Got into all of them. Now I teach at Columbia University in the graduate program. Ha ha ha! Fancy on you. And that sort of stark contrast between my life experience as a youth and then everything that followed has really created a sense of empathy and compassion and commitment that I have to be a bridge builder. So everything that I've done in my life, working in every sector, has been about advocating for the least of these. And it's what helped me, I think, at that time when I was pretty much 17, where I decided that I didn't have a name for it, but where I decided that I wanted to be a servant leader, a person who exercised power and influences people who have power to help create more opportunity, to help more people self-actualize, because my life experience has shown me in every stage that a lot of those outcomes are dictated by who we are and where we come from. And that is really the framing of what you see evidenced in this book, Growing the Elephant.
Yeah, that's amazing, because in the guests that we've had on this podcast, one continuing theme that emerges is after many years of research in their own given fields and subjects, it's this idea of giving back and helping others. At what point did that, why in the service of others for you?
I think because of the we try not to use the word disadvantage, but the fact that I was so much exposed to people who had unearned advantage. And I saw so much in my life experience and continue to see the inequities where outcomes can be predicted by a person's identity. And that is a historical fact. And so in my family life, although it was challenging, I was very blessed to have parents who were very socially conscious. My father was a classmate of Martin Luther King's at Morehouse College in Atlanta. So I grew up with an ethos towards service and civil rights and justice. My mom was the second oldest of 14 children. She grew up in a sharecropping community in rural North Carolina, and was committed her whole life to giving back. So that was an ethos. We are people of faith. So I often say when I'm describing my youth, it could be easily described as a rags to riches story, and it has been written about in that way. But that is an inaccurate characterization. I had a very rich formative life, even coming up in amidst a world of challenges. And so I bring the respect for people who have come that road with all that I do, and assume that there are lots of assets that are there in all people. I like to think that talent is equally distributed, but opportunity is not. That is my lived experience. Yes. So the commitment of this work that Chris and I are doing is about helping to equip people, especially through reflection, especially through self-inquiry, to activate and to be agents of change in their own lives, wherever they sit, and to move on those intentions that we share, and to do it in a more powerful way.
Very beautifully said. Thank you for that, Gloria. And for you, Chris, what is it about your upbringing that has shaped the man that you are today?
Well, that's a great question. Because I did a lot of reflection, and in the book, I begin the story in 2005, But for the purpose of answering your question, I grew up in Southwest Virginia, middle class family, began primary school in the years of desegregation. So the busing of children from one part of town to the other, and had some very powerful experiences in that. It's one of them that just stands out. So on the first day of integration, I remember I met a fellow named Manfred, who was the second Black person I'd ever met in my life. And at the beginning, he walked into the class and he said, "Do you want to fight?" And I said, "No," because I didn't realize how afraid he was, because he's the one who had been bussed, not me.
Yeah.
And I said, "Well, can't we just be friends?" And I remember that now, 55 years later. Whereas one of my brothers had the experience of getting into a physical altercation and carrying that for many, many years. So our experiences early in life, I love that you begin with that question, so much inform where we begin. So for me, the idea of, I went to an all-male college, which is still the only all-male college, now the only all-male college in Virginia. So I grew up in a very focused environment, of folks who look like me, come from where I come from, look like who I look like, have the same life experiences. And then as I got into professional life, I am currently a retired and recovering HR executive, is how I describe myself. So I'm not a lifelong educator or anything else, but a corporate executive. And where I get to the point describing the book of 2005 and the many years in between, but the whole idea of everybody's equal and colorblind is good, and that's the way it's supposed to be. And I believed all those things. I believed that was possible, preferable, in fact, because that's how I was raised. The golden rule: you treat people that you'd like to be treated. And through those years of into schooling and after that, realizing that what they dubbed the platinum rule, which is to treat others as they would prefer to be treated, it was a mind shift. Because why would everybody not want to be treated the way I am?
Interesting.
Yeah. So and then recognizing that to satisfy the platinum rule of treating others as they would like to be treated, one has to understand how they would like to be treated. And to understand that, one has to understand how they have been treated. And that begins a more difficult process of actually examining it. Gloria used the phrase lived experiences. And so for me, we're reflecting all the way back from my lived experiences to my childhood to the point today of my lived experiences. Of course, they're mine and I own them. And that's how life is, because that's what happened to me. To recognize that, well, other folks don't have that experience. And why is that? So the idea of growing the elephant is, one, to meet people where they are. Because one of the things it's funny, I've become a serial student, so I describe it. So I'm always studying one thing or another. Through the University of California, San Diego, the MBSR teacher curriculum, which I completed, was just the latest of those formal studies. Because continuing to learn is the willingness to continue to ask the difficult questions. And frankly, my mindfulness experience, I'm a novice. I've been practicing for many years and teaching for the last 3, and I'm still a novice. But beginner's mind attitude around these questions of diversity, equity, inclusion, I think, is what's necessary just to begin the exploration. And then when we ask ourselves these difficult questions, to be able to sit with them.
Yeah.
So that's a quick journey from 3rd grade to now.
And you just threw the words diversity, equity, and inclusion together. And what I'd mentioned is that, as in preparation for this podcast and just doing my research, I see those words coupled together and the acronym, DEI. Can you help to explain, why is that a thing now? What, especially in business, that it's it's common vernacular at the moment. When and where does this appear? And for those other listeners that may not be in the corporate world and living here in Europe or in London, why are they together, and how did it come into its own right?
So I'll start, and Gloria can add so much more to this, but it's an evolution. So in the United States, when you were in the 1970s and the 1980s, this is a matter of employment, so anti-discrimination. So going all the way back to the passage of laws. So the idea that it's illegal to discriminate people based on skin color, their gender, when do women get to vote, right? Because our history as a culture has always been can I be done now, right? Well, okay, so you're now emancipated, you're not slaves anymore. Can I be done? Oh, no, you can't. You have to level the playing field. Well, can I be done? No, actually, women can't vote. Okay, well, now women can vote. Can we be done? Well, we need a civil rights law for everybody. Okay, got that. Can we be done? Well, no, actually, you're going to start restricting women's reproductive rights. Oh, can we be done? So it's the evolution of law as it played in employment. So if you go back to employment, it was the idea of equal opportunity, which is the law, and affirmative action, which was the law. And then I think when you go through the evolution of corporate companies, the idea of diversity was the first, and that's really a 1990s thing, diversity, because it recognizes that the workplace is being filled with people who are different from each other. And that's really the essence of diversity. We are different. What are our differences?
Yeah.
That evolved into inclusion, because the recognition was that, well, if you can be diverse, but if diverse people are not included, then you're not meeting the spirit, and you're not actually gaining what we come to realize and the studies show as competitive advantage. Because what we know from the research is that diverse teams that are managed well outperform homogeneous teams. But the rest of that science also tells you that diverse teams that are not well managed underperform homogeneous teams. So now, instead of a matter of moral rectitude or let's be philosophically or politically correct, let's talk about competitive advantage. So diversity and inclusion begins to give me a sense of I can win in the marketplace. Hence, that's the corporate side of it. And right. Equity of opportunity. So now I have D, E, and I. And part of and to be candid, some of the reaction that you get from people who are skeptical of this work is they say, oh, it's an alphabet soup, because now you've added B, now you've added belonging. The way I think about it is that you have diversity because you leverage it through inclusion, which will achieve equity, and people will feel they belong. So that for me is they're not interchangeable terms. They have individual meaning. Gloria is the expert on this more than me.
Yeah, you did a beautiful job as usual explaining it. The only thing I would add is that on the point about equity, we believe that there is lots of learning and we believe optimism that will emerge if people appreciate that the benefit of this work of pursuing diversity, equity, and inclusion is that outcomes are different for everyone, right? Equity is about power. There being power sharing, where there are diverse perspectives. Those perspectives that Chris just mentioned often yield higher performance and innovation. And with those diversity of perspectives, people are making decisions about leveraging power and money and human resources to get different outcomes with a very specific intention of getting different outcomes, more equitable outcomes that are then going to create more innovation, more performance, stronger communities, when you talk about the external application of this. So what we believe very strongly is that this work and hopefully the tools that are provided in growing the elephant will allow people to reflect to the point that they're able to see how their individual mindsets and actions can create a more equitable space, can create more equitable outcomes because of how their consciousness, how they think about, as Chris mentioned, the experiences of others and what's necessary to unlock the potential of individuals. It's very much about the individual agent, right? Chris, I love it when he says, we're very interested in the kinds of questions that get asked by the individual so that they can be their own best teachers and appreciate that maybe some of those assumptions that people around me have put on me, or assumptions that Chris and people in his early environment offered, are not exactly lining up with reality. And we have to name reality. That's the acknowledged part of unearned, what we call unearned advantage, recognizing that it is not a level playing field, that people are treated differently, and we have to meet them where they are and come alongside to get to a better place.
Just for the book then, so Growing the Elephant, and I quote, is for anyone working to increase innovation, performance, and inclusion by building practices and mindset to meet and stay with what's difficult. It's for leaders and contributors at any level and those who help them build and sustain diversity, equity, and inclusion. Recommended by leaders, according to Bloomberg.
We're very
recently.
fortunate for that endorsement.
I hadn't heard the term as well, earned advantage, again, before this week and reading the book. And so, you just mentioned it there, Gloria. So can you help to explain where did that come from? What does it mean? And why is the word privilege a faux pas almost, or it's a word like I said, coming into this podcast, I'm out of my comfort zone when I'm talking about certain things, because I feel that I don't want to be disrespectful or be out of place, and so I'm was very careful to choose it. But why is that the case? And perhaps if you could just shed a bit of light and just help clear some of that confusion.
Sure. So I'm happy to start with why not privilege, and then Chris, I'll invite you to give your pithy explanation about how we migrated to the new framework, because he does it much better than I do. Yeah. And I think I'm well equipped to talk about why that word privilege doesn't work, because my whole life experience as an executive in every sector has taught me that the word is toxic. In the American context and globally, I do work in Africa and in international development as well. When we start talking about the fact that individuals are privileged, or societies are privileged, or nations are privileged, or colonizers are privileged, it puts people on their back heels. And we end up spending, for those of us who are operating with good intention and goodwill to get to a better place, even if all of us are in agreement that we want to get to a place where we are willing to share power to make that happen, if we start the conversation by naming the fact that some people have privilege and some don't, it like picks a nerve that is never constructive, because it makes people defensive about their own belief in themselves. And people often, for all kinds of reasons, interpret that if someone is saying they're privileged, it means that they haven't worked for something, or that they have something that they don't deserve. And so we end up spending so much time saying, no, not that yes, in a practical way, it prevents us from getting to what we are talking about. So this reframing is meant to just take away that word that I believe is toxic, and to offer a different framework that allows people to lean in to the conversation and to the work, instead of feeling that they're getting called out. So that's why not privilege. Chris, you want to talk about why we think our way is better?
Yeah, and just before that, Chris, so is the earned advantage, is that something that you've coined? Or was that an industry is that an industry term? Again, pardon my ignorance about this whole topic, but is it?
No, it's actually it is what makes it different. And as Gloria described, because, and just to be clear, we're not saying we're not denying the reality that some people have advantages over others by virtue of who they are and where they're from. The challenge is their word. So, because if you have privilege, you really don't want to hear about it. I don't want to talk about it, think about it. And if you don't have it, you're exhausted and incensed by the reality every day. So as a phrase, it really hasn't worked either way. So now the idea of unearned advantage you can find that in the literature in buried deep in some lower education, primary education work where they try to talk about that. But where we went with that is, so if we want to find a better way to talk about it, first, if we, instead of privilege, let's talk about advantage. So the book begins with, let's recognize that people have advantages or opportunity for advantages. And we're going to begin with earned advantage. So let's begin with the idea that anyone has the opportunity to earn advantage in this world. So when we begin with that, we found this in the early days of the conversations, is that people would, yeah, that's right. People would, yes, very much agree that, people can earn advantage in this world.
Such as?
Opportunity, promotion, economic advancement, social advancement, opportunities to learn. These are all the different types of advantages that we think about in the workplace for the most part. But if you think about it, it's beyond that as well.
Yeah.
So if we can all agree that anyone can earn advantage, then good, let's take a breath. And literally, that's what we do in the book. We introduce the first of the reflective practices.
The breath exercise, right? Your first exercise, yeah?
Yes. Mm-hmm. So everybody take a breath, because now that we've accepted that anyone can earn advantage, let's talk about the role of unearned advantage. And in our take, we present we define unearned advantages as being anything relative to who you are or where you're from. It gives you advantages in, I'll say life, but in professional life, more specifically. So for example, let's take me. So I am, by inspection, you could tell I am Caucasian, I am white, I am able-bodied, I am extroverted. I was born and raised a Christian. I grew up with clean water and good food and public education and a stable household. And, if I was 3 inches taller, I'd have it all. Too bad.
Yep.
I'm just short, one unearned advantage. Because why? What does the science tell me is that height has an impact. So I can look at these things and we can say, well, the world should be colorblind. And one of the things we try to do in the book is help readers differentiate between what should be and what is.
Yes.
Because that's an important distinction. And there's the personality and a lot of things play a role in this. But the natural tendency to, I see what I see. So I recognize my headwinds, but I don't recognize yours. I recognize your tailwinds, but I don't feel like I have any. And, when you're running and the wind's at your back, you don't notice it. So exploring that notion of unearned advantage. So the way the book is framed, first is to recognize advantage, earned and unearned. Earned first, because it frankly level sets. Unearned, because the science and the data tells us this is how humans are and the conditions. And then to work with unearned advantage. Once I recognize earned and unearned, I have to work with unearned, whether I have a little or a lot. So our book isn't directed at, well, if you have, because that's from our experience, the challenge, in fact, the failure of a lot of diversity, equity, inclusion, programmatic education efforts is they come from a position of moral superiority or guilt. Trying to meet people from a position of you should be here. And if you're not here already, then I'll tell you how you need to get there. Our view is to try to meet people where they are, and to be candid, if they're in a place that I maybe once was or never have been. But the challenge is to meet them where they are, as Gloria said, with better questions rather than a better case.
So essentially, the elephant in the room is the fact that there are unearned advantages, that some people have advantages based on who they are and where they are from. Mm-hmm. That is the reality that we are helping, encouraging people to embrace and to work with, to deal with that. And then hopefully then there was multiple people, because then it's the what do I do now part of it.
How do I grow that earned advantage for someone else, including myself?
Right. And a lot of that involves the contemplative, reflective self-inquiry that we know has been such a major part of your life.
Yeah. And do you feel now that with I've been reading a lot about the future of skills work and, the humans plus machines era that is approaching. Is this a, like when you mentioned, corporate, and that's predominantly the field, is this something more and more relevant and important as one of the growing skills? Like you look at the McKinsey list of skills do you see this as playing in that field as we look to the future of skills?
I'll jump in and say we absolutely believe that. And we know that there will be progress working with people like you and others in the community if the people in power can recognize that this conversation should be considered vital among the competencies that lead to innovation and performance. Our belief is that this consciousness, this understanding and the tools that are provided will enable leaders and teams of all kinds, whether it's corporate or foundations or nonprofits or higher ed, to work more productively, to see each other more powerfully, and to come up with better solutions. From the strictly pragmatic business side of the proposition, we all know that globally the workforce is becoming more diverse in every way. Right? Race, gender, people with abilities, gender, age, the whole gambit. And we know that the consumer base is similarly becoming that. What we find is that very many leaders in all of the sectors that I have mentioned know that there is a business imperative to shift the way that teams are organized and the way that we think about our internal and external stakeholders. But the how has been elusive. Right. And we believe that this is a better way, that to talk about using the growth mindset and all of the things that Rhonda McGee and others that you've mentioned have espoused is a more powerful way to get at the outcomes that we all share than to have what we believe has been the blame and shame game, and in many instances, the politicized characterization of what this work is, which we know is really not aligned with the best intentions that we have.
Yeah, if I could just add one piece to that as well, which is part of the question you focused on the automation of work. So what we know is true is that machines work by programming. And when programming or the programmers are limited in their thought and their experience, when they rely on their own lived experience and not accounting for those lived experience of others, those limitations show up in the programming, which then shows up in limitations and even disparities of the machines.
Yeah.
And we know that one of the things that we've talked quite a bit about in the book, which is familiar to many in this diversity, equity, and inclusion work, is this whole notion of implicit bias that is built into all human beings. And there are, fun little games and more extensive tests that have demonstrated with all kinds of longitudinal analysis and studies that we all have, even those of us who consider ourselves to be well along the path in the journey that we're describing. As human beings, we are wired to have implicit bias. And so there is an exercise that we encourage readers to take that will show them that these biases exist. So the issue is not whether we have the biases. The issue is whether there's the level of awareness and whether we can, through mindfulness and reflection and self-inquiry, work around them and not get in the way of what we want to achieve.
Yeah, it's very much like in my teaching of mindfulness, it's like, you're thinking all day long anyway. You can't stop it even if you tried, but it's developing that skill to be aware. Once you realize some of the chaos and the thinking that's going on, then you can be in a position to play a more proactive role in how you respond to thoughts rather than just reacting. Just very quickly, I see that, Paula Caligiuri is a mutual friend of ours. Paula on
I have
cultural
to.
agility. No, I just throw that in there because we did a podcast with her recently, and she, you Google anything on cultural
Oh,
agility,
there she is.
and she is the first name that pops up, and I saw it. I thought another name that crosses over, and we'll be releasing our episode with her quite soon.
Oh, great. Well, I must say that analogy that you just drew is brilliant.
Mm-hmm.
It's exactly the approach that we think have found it works well, and it's not just theory. I mean, Chris and I did this book. We had a ball doing it. Both of us teach in graduate programs and all over the world, and yet this is not an academic approach. It's grounded in academics and research and what have you, but it is meant to be a very practical book that is based on our experiences as leaders working with other leaders. So we hope that there's some sensitivity to the times and the kinds of attitudes and challenges and the noise, that people will have when they embark upon this work. And we just try to just say, yeah, we get it. This is hard. And there are folks on all sides of ideological and political spectrums who bring baggage to this work that is unhelpful, and we're trying to unclutter that baggage.
Yeah. So if we could just shift a little bit now, so how did you guys get into mindfulness, and what impact has that had on your life, and the way that you live your life and the way that you interact with others, etc. I'll be very keen. Was it an illness or too much stress and you thought I need something, or what's the introduction into mindfulness for you? And perhaps Chris, we start with you.
Sure. So for me, the exploration and just the whole notion of trying to pay attention, in the current moment, began with martial arts practices.
That's right. Yes.
So my wife, both my sons and I all were studying karate for the last over 20 years. And so that was a beginning of a kind of a light touch piece into it. And there were some aspects of quiet moments and reflection and applying more focus to movement in katas and forms. But when in 2016, when I retired from corporate life, I got more serious around meditation as a practice, and part of that was completing my yoga teacher training, which I now teach a couple days a week, and much more getting into that the notion of quiet and reflection and sound as a tool. And it was funny. I'll share this story, which some may resonate, some may find annoying. But in 2016, I went to a mindful conference in Washington, D.C., and there were thousands of people there, and my wife and I were there. It was very exciting, and some of the giants were there speaking, and then they had the session on here's all the programs, the $10,000 programs that you can pay for to do that, to be qualified to teach it, which bothered me, turned me off. And being the person who I was at that time, I said, well, I don't need to do that. I can do this myself. So I began more of a self-study on Vipassana and just simple meditation. And that's where my first realizations around inequity surfaced. And I wrote a series of articles in 2016, 17 as Can Mindfulness Reboot D&I? Because that was this notion that the programming, it was not meeting people where they were. And that was a flirtation. I dove into it, did a program with it, and then kind of left it alone. And then decided a couple of years later that I really did need the formal training. So I went connected with folks, took some programs at UC San Diego, the Center for Mindfulness there, and then enrolled in the teacher training program, which is a 2-year curriculum. And that was the best decision I could make at that time. Because what I learned about whether it's karate or yoga or meditation, studying to be a teacher doesn't require me to teach, but it does require me to be better at the practice. And so that was in those years, 2019, 2020, I finished up that and have taught MBSR a few times since. But the relationship to the work goes back to getting more comfortable with myself and the application to being in, because my life has been incredibly, and I'll use the word privileged. I have lots of unearned advantages. I've not had to face the challenges that so many had. We've had illness in my family. We've had some very difficult situations in my family, which mindfulness has been absolutely central to navigating to this point.
Yeah, and it's interesting because John Kabat-Zinn, you mentioned his work, the MBSR. It's actually a good friend of mine. I've run his Facebook pages. We've had him like 5-6 times now, and when he comes to London, I'll pick him up. We do our carpool podcast where we do like a one in the car together, and it's every time. It's weird to think every time I hear the MBSR, it's oh yeah, that's John's work, and it's the role that he's played to to help get us mindful. Taking his approach. Every time I hear it, it just blows my mind that
I when this podcast is done, I can't wait that just to know that he will have heard it. Yeah. Because I've listened to John, I don't know how many times, and been part of the MBSR teacher community that he's built, and he is incredibly inspiring. So, yeah, absolutely.
And for you, Gloria, yeah. Because this is my favorite subject to talk about. This is where I thrive. So I can't. I love talking about this. So
I love hearing it. You are both beaming as you describe your experience and the community. I think that we all are now a part of. I came upon meditation after having spent maybe 20 years of being really devoted to just a prayer practice as a Christian. And I happened to accompany a very dear friend of mine who was a board member of the David Lynch Foundation to one of their fundraising events in Washington, D.C. For those who don't know, that foundation is very much committed to funding and creating programming to make meditation pervasive all over the world, and especially increasingly now in underserved communities for school children and the like. It was such a powerful experience because smartly they had people give first-person testimonies about how meditation had transformed their lives, especially in managing conditions of trauma. And all of my work has been around helping underserved a population. So I was all in, signed up for it on the spot to participate in some of the training that day. The next week, I had a very traumatic, unexpected life experience occur to me. It was the most traumatic experience I've ever had, which I will not talk about. But I had breast cancer at 29, and that was a cakewalk compared to what happened that very next week for me. And so 2 weeks later, I went to that TM meeting in Annapolis, Maryland. And I remember in that meeting and in the 3 subsequent meetings, I cried the entire time. And it was a safe, beautiful, wonderful place to just be. Fast forward, I ended up relocating to Florida. As soon as I got here, I looked for a TM community. I just last week went to one in West Palm Beach Island, and that's where I live now in Miami, and some my family is in South Florida. It's the thing that I look forward to, not just because the practice has become such an integral part of my life, which essentially fortifies and informs the prayer life that I had already, but also what I love is the community that that this provides, where it's almost sort of a pre-selected group of people who have just set their intentions on something beautiful. And I'm sure everyone who knows me well has had to hear me give my own testimony about
Yeah.
about it, and particularly in the African American community where the faith tradition is strong. There can be some misunderstandings about meditation and its compatibility with other faith traditions.
Yes.
And so in some ways, I've become a bit of an ambassador for explaining the beauty of it and how it can be beautifully integrated into our growth experiences.
And what I
And would,
no, go ahead.
sorry, I just wanted to add in. So we did a call out to Rhonda B. McGee, North Star. I also would like to call out David Treleaven and his work on trauma sensitive mindfulness. If you're familiar, it's a very powerful education, and David's built a curriculum around truly trauma sensitive mindfulness.
Yes,
and
does ring a bell. Yeah,
I recommend that to anyone and everyone who's in the space, especially if you're in the teaching space, because it's great awareness of what others have faced. So I wanted to make it. When I think of it, John Kemp is amazing, and Rhonda McGee, David, which we actually mentioned in the book, around the window of tolerance.
Yes.
Because what happens when we're, and you know this, of course, Squeeze, that when you're thinking about difficult things, you can get out of your window. And then whether it's fight, flight, freeze, appease, or whatever your reaction may be, but recognizing that guiding others through these difficult conversations also requires that awareness, because we don't know how people have been traumatized. And Gloria's story is just so powerful. And just being aware of that in the introduction of the right questions. So we say, our program, we don't have a program. Our approach is one of asking better questions, being mindful in the asking of those questions. So I just wanted to shout out about David there too.
Lovely.
Yeah. And can I also offer that for any of the audience members for this podcast who aren't already sold on the benefits of meditation and mindfulness, I would just like to assert that for me and in the experiences that I've had with others who resist this kind of commitment, there's lack of understanding about the practical usefulness of it, especially for people who consider themselves to be change makers, activists. I was a lobbyist, for foundations and nonprofits. And what I have found through my practice is that it has given me greater efficacy because I am more comfortable with my emotions and my ability to be centered in any situation. There used to be a time in my life, maybe you can intuit from the story, that I've given, where I was not always comfortable with the fact that I am an empathic person. And now I completely embrace that and know that that is my superpower in all that I do, that I can present my feelings, be transparent, humble, all the things that many of the people that all of us read and follow espouse, that I'm able to do that and be more impactful in my engagements with other human beings because of that strength. Yes. So I hope that this message is helpful to anyone who is doubting any aspect of the benefits in that regard. Being in the world as opposed to just helping me feel better or be better in my internal space or my family, which of course is all wonderful outcomes too.
Yeah, and I think just given the conversations that I've had, whether it's with a Muslim or a Christian and different varieties of Christianity, that when one goes to pray, whatever religion, that connection that they have, the more mindful you are, you notice that even in prayer, we get distracted. And so you could be, I've got 5 minutes, I'm going to say my prayers. And for that person, they're really, they believe in that moment. They're in like a, direct connection to their God.
Yes.
And it's like, so whatever religion that you are, this is a tool of constant to allow, if you want to have that 5 minute prayer, let it be a 5 minute of prayer rather than you know, 3.5 minutes of prayer and then a minute and a half of just mind wandering, and I'm praying again.
I love that.
You know, really be connected and just observe. I've just strayed. And just imagine, you know, if you actually face to face and sat, you know, next to your God, it would be almost disrespectful to, you know, we're having a conversation and all of a sudden you think about the shopping that you need to do later on, or the email that you need to write. And it's like, oh. But it's, you know, so whatever religion, it's, you know, love your God even more, connect even more.
They're not mutually exclusive.
Be more deeply connected to your, you know, to your prayer and to have that moment. So I thought I would just throw that in there. And just lastly on this point, how has the feedback been in the book, but specifically to the breathing exercises and the mindfulness aspect of it? Has it been taken well, and are people getting the benefits that you want them to get out of those exercises?
You know, I'll start with it. It's hard to know for some. What we did in the pre-publication work, sharing the drafts and getting responses, what I found is that people will take one of two approaches to this. One is, oh, you'd like me to read the book. Let's see how fast I can read it. The other is that I'll read the book as you tell me in the book, because in the book we quote Desmond Tutu, you eat an elephant, you know, one bite at a time. And so, and I've gotten in probably half a dozen conversations with people. They share and I'm going to say, intentional discomfort of the practices. I had a friend of mine text me one night, just said, I just did the benefit of the doubt exercise. I hate it, and I hate you. And I say, good. So it's which, you know, and that's the challenge, I think, is that by taking the approach of asking better questions, there's no proper pace.
Yes.
So, like, when it's funny, in an early conversation, Gloria and I had a conversation with a corporate leader who said, "Oh, okay, this is great. What's your program?"
Mm-hmm.
So, well, we don't have a program. Like, you don't have a program? Well, what am I supposed to do with this? Read it and try it. So this may be a colossal commercial failure. We'll see, but that's not why we wrote it anyway.
Yeah.
So the idea that people will grapple with it is good. Gloria.
I have a hopeful story based on a conversation I had 2 weeks ago. Chris and I were talking about it the other day. Very powerful board chair of a very powerful foundation, white male, fourth generation, super rich. Did I say powerful guy? Read the book. It's a person that I've done some work with and his organization. And he did what Chris said, which is ignore our suggestion. And he read the thing from beginning to end because he wanted to get ready for a meeting that he and I were having. And he said it was a really powerful experience reading it. But the week after was the time when he needed to go back and do the exercises around reflection and meditation and breathing, because he was walking around with the challenges, the awareness that came up through what was shared in the book. And it was upsetting to him, and he needed to wrestle with it. And he said it was one of the most powerful experiences he's had. Like, literally, he told the story about being in a grocery store where he was standing in line and he was thinking about one of the stories that was actually a very almost first person story about something that had happened in my life, with a few characters changed to protect the innocent. And he didn't know that. And he was reflecting on it. And he said he actually got in his car and had to sit and really take a few breaths to get through it. And so I don't care if every single person who reads the book doesn't do the exercises. That one story has me jazzed because this person is going to be changed. He has influence in lots of other places. He's going to carry himself everywhere he goes and be a person, I think, who espouses some aspects of what are included in this book. And so I think there's some hope there.
Yeah. That's a beautifully said again. So I think, again, thank you so much for doing this and for sharing. You know, I really hope you've enjoyed it. And one of the ways I like to end the podcast is given your experiences and the book and all the learning lessons you've taken on the way. You know, I just wanted to ask you both, what matters most to you? And then perhaps Gloria, if you want to take the first run at it.
What matters most to me in the context of the book, or
no,
rephrase the question
this is
again,
for
please.
you. This
just period.
Period. What matters most to you?
Yes. What matters most to me in my own, I'll answer it around my own sense of personal agency, is that I operate with boldness to realize what I believe is the calling in my life, which is to do all that I can to help others self-actualize. And if that means that I'm doing that, working one-on-one with people who have that aspiration, or if it means I'm working with people with tremendous power who are able to influence the outcomes of others to be their best selves, that's the thing I care about. I believe that there is that of God in every human being. And my commitment is about doing all that I can to create circumstances where people can be healthier and wiser and freer. That is a servant leader's mantra, and that's pretty much what I live by.
Consistent. I like it. And for you, Chris, you know.
So in the spirit of consistency, in 1996, I crafted, that's back when everybody was doing mission statements, and I crafted my own mission statement, which I have held to this day. And that mission statement is casting light on the path to salvation by developing people and the organizations in which they work. So I don't tell people what salvation is. That's not my job. It's more time with your family, more time on your golf course, more time with your God, whatever that is. But if I can develop people and the organizations in which they work, if I can help individuals, and it's beginning with leaders, because that frankly that's most of my background, reduce the noise level, reduce the chaos, help them find their clarity in the organization or between their ears or in their heart, then perhaps that will give them a little bit of time to go find or pursue further that notion of salvation, or just be in it. So that I had reason not long ago to talk about this as well, but that mission hasn't changed.
Yeah.
And this book, I think, is just the latest expression of it. And I fall short every day, and I just get up the next day and go again.
Beautiful.
Can you tell how much fun we're having? Can you just tell?
Yeah.
It's just great. It's a blessing. It's just great.
Yeah, I mean, I would, just to see the work that you're doing and the circles that you teach in and that you work with, and the book now, I'm just so excited for you guys, and I just think you have a wonderful message. So if I'm a listener and I want to, support, I want to get I want to get a copy of Growing the Elephant. How does one do that?
Wherever you buy books. If you're into Amazon or Barnes and Noble, or in the States, if they're bookshop.org, if you don't want to contribute to corporate pockets. But basically, wherever you buy books, it is a UK publisher, actually, Practical Inspiration. Mm-hmm. Our good friend Allison Jones runs that shop, and they are our partner in the book.
Or you could go to the website and get more information about it too. Growing the Elephant, the name of the book.
Yeah, and it's a
right.
beautifully made website. And I saw that, the section on growth mindset, reference to Carol Dweck, and I know that a lot of Heart and Soul has, gotten into making that look beautiful. And I encourage everyone to get a copy of the book. And again, just from the bottom of my heart, I thank you so much for joining me and for sharing your wisdom and for and your heart as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's been such an honor. Thank you for all you do.